Caitlin Clark was the one person everyone wanted to hear from, and she said nothing at all. Her own teammate, Sophie Cunningham, had just told ESPN she doesn't believe transgender athletes belong in women's sports, and the fallout hit every corner of the league. A rival coach's pointed wardrobe choice, rallies outside 3 separate arenas, even Cunningham's own podcast co-host pushing back on their show. 2 weeks earlier, the Supreme Court had already ruled on a nearly identical question. Clark, asked directly, deferred to the league. Cunningham never has. That gap between them is where this story actually lives. Let's break down exactly what was said and by whom. The interview that sparked a firestorm. The comments came in an ESPN profile published in mid-July. Asked about transgender athletes in women's sports, Cunningham did not hedge. "I want to protect young girls in a locker room, or young girls in sport who shouldn't have to go against biological men," she told the outlet.
Cunningham said, "I want to protect young girls in a locker room or young girls in sport who shouldn't have to go against biological men."
She addressed the accusation that the position amounted to hostility toward transgender people directly. In the same interview, "I got a lot of negative feedback about me hating trans. And I'm like, I never once said that. I think that I am here to extend love. But I also think with that love is truth, being honest." Was that a clarification or a restatement of the same position in softer language? Read closely. It reads like both at once. The timing mattered as much as the words. 2 weeks earlier, on June 30th, the United States Supreme Court had ruled 6-3 in West Virginia versus BPJ, and Little versus Hickox, upholding state laws in Idaho and West Virginia that restrict transgender athletes from competing on girls' and women's school teams. Justice Brett Kavanaugh wrote the majority opinion, grounding the ruling in Title IX and the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause, writing plainly that the states may maintain women's and girls' sports for biological females.
Kavanaugh said, quote, "In other words, may schools determine eligibility for women's and girls' sports based on biological sex? The answer is yes."
The opinion drew a specific legal line rather than a sweeping one. It distinguished this case from a separate 2020 ruling that had protected transgender workers from employment discrimination, reasoning that a workplace statute and a school sports statute were, in Kavanaugh's words, built for vastly different contexts. Why did one WNBA player's comments become a national flashpoint within days of a single ESPN feature? Because the country was already mid-argument when she stepped into it. The ruling did not apply to professional sports, or to the WNBA specifically, but it set the legal and political terms of the conversation Cunningham's comments landed inside. Reporters pressed her again days later, ahead of Indiana's game against the Connecticut Sun. She did not soften anything. "I said what I said. I think it's kind of common sense," she told reporters. "I think it's really important to protect children, and that's little girls who are also involved in that category. I stand on what I said." Around the same period, she was asked in the same ESPN feature about her broader political leanings and a nickname that had begun circulating online, MAGA Barbie, a label she addressed but did not organize her basketball commentary around. The scale of the underlying population involved is worth stating plainly, because both sides of this argument cite it differently. In testimony to Congress in 2024, NCAA President Charlie Baker said he was aware of only 10 transgender athletes among more than 500,000 college athletes nationwide. Since then, the NCAA has restricted women's category competition to athletes assigned female at birth.
Well, tonight the NCAA is shifting its policy to ban transgender athletes from competing in women's sports.
And 27 states now have laws limiting transgender participation in school sports. None of those policies apply directly to the WNBA, a professional league with its own separate rules, but they form the backdrop Cunningham's comments landed against. A debate already running at national volume before she said a single word to ESPN. Does a policy affecting 10 known athletes out of 500,000 justify the scale of the reaction that followed? That question sits underneath almost every version of this argument, on every side of it, and this piece will not resolve it either. The reaction inside Indiana's own building reflected how large the story had grown beyond one interview. An ESPN feature published later in July described the scene outside a Fever home game as its own small demonstration of the divide. Supporters printing roughly 100 "Thank You Sophie" posters, carrying golden balloons marked with the number 8, her jersey number, alongside signs reading "Democrats for Single-Sex Sports" and "Title IX, Hold the Line." Not every sign fit a single political label. The presence of a sign explicitly invoking Democratic identity alongside the broader rally underlined that the reaction did not break down as cleanly along party lines as either side's loudest voices suggested. One supporter who organized part of the poster printing put the effort in simpler terms when asked about it, joking that, "You've always got to make a friend with a printer, you know." A small, almost mundane detail sitting inside a story that otherwise ran entirely on national stakes language. Was any of this actually about Sophie Cunningham specifically, or was she simply the athlete whose comments happened to land in the middle of an argument the country was already having? The posters, the balloons, the competing slogans outside her own team's arena suggest the latter, a debate several states and one Supreme Court ruling in the making, given a face and a locker room to attach itself to once she spoke. That distinction matters for understanding what happened next, because very little of what came afterward was actually about basketball at all. The backlash followed her everywhere. The backlash arrived fast, and it followed her on the road. Fans booed her in Portland during a Fever game there.
For the Fever Fire matchup, with fans clashing over controversial comments by Indiana's Sophie Cunningham.
She answered the boos directly afterward rather than avoiding the subject. "I'm here to play basketball, but I'm also here to be me," she said. "I'm not going to shadow that or hide or dim my light just because maybe people don't agree with that." Is that a statement about basketball or about something else entirely? By her own account, she does not separate the two. Portland was not an isolated stop. Boos followed her into other road arenas in the weeks after the ESPN feature ran, a pattern consistent enough that opposing crowds seemed to treat it as part of the pregame routine by the time Indiana reached its next few stops. Cunningham's response stayed consistent across those appearances as well. She neither escalated the confrontation with hostile crowds nor retreated from the subject when reporters raised it afterward. That consistency became part of the story in its own right. A player facing this level of sustained public reaction, who changes her position, softens her language, or stops answering questions, gives a story a natural next beat. Cunningham did none of those things, which meant the coverage kept circling back to the same handful of quotes rather than finding new ones. Does refusing to update a position in an environment built to reward new statements count as stubbornness or as consistency? The people booing her and the people printing her name on posters would answer that question very differently. Support followed her just as visibly as the criticism did. Organized rallies gathered outside Fever road games in Seattle, Portland, and later Minneapolis.
The Indiana Fever faced off against the Portland Fire at the Moda Center in the wake of the heated exchanges at the Storm game in Seattle, as you just saw in that report.
Supporters holding signs reading "Thank You Sophie," some wearing shirts printed with a stylized XX and XY, a company slogan built around protecting fairness and opportunity in women's sports. The demonstrations were not universally welcomed inside the league's broadcast partners or its locker rooms, but they were real, organized, and repeated across 3 different cities. What does it mean that a single NBA reserve guard's media comments could generate coordinated demonstrations in 3 separate arenas within a matter of weeks? At minimum, it means the story had outgrown the sport it started in. Even people close to Cunningham did not fall in line uniformly. West Wilson, who co-hosts a podcast with her, disagreed with her publicly, arguing on their own show that the framing overstated the issue's real-world scale. Right-wingers have convinced a massive portion of people in our country that transgender athletes are a threat to sports in America, when mathematically that's not the case at all, Wilson said, adding that the debate was pulling attention away from what he considered more consequential issues facing the country. What does it say about how deep this divide runs when the person she podcasts with every week wouldn't back her up? The disagreement drew its own wave of reaction online, and it did not break cleanly in Wilson's favor either.
These people are like a threat to sports in America when mathematically that's not the case at all.
Some listeners praised him for pushing back publicly on a co-host and friend. Others accused him of using the moment for attention, pointing to his existing reality television reputation as evidence he was picking the disagreement for exposure rather than conviction. Cunningham herself did not respond to Wilson's comments with the same directness she brought to her critics elsewhere. The podcast relationship, unlike the on-court rivalries this story would soon touch, stayed a working one. The two continued recording together in the weeks that followed, disagreement and all, which is its own small data point about how this argument has actually played out inside the relationships closest to it, as opposed to how it plays out in isolated clips online. Should a disagreement this public have ended a working partnership? By every available account, it did not. The show continued, and so did the argument, running in parallel rather than resolving either way. The backlash from her own league. The most visible pushback came from inside the WNBA itself. Minnesota Lynx head coach Cheryl Reeve addressed the controversy the day before her team faced the Fever, telling reporters it was problematic that some people believe transgender athletes are the biggest problem in women's sports, and that she comes from a space of inclusion where every kid has a right to sports. She added she found it bothersome that there was a faction of people in our country that are making this a massive issue.
It is not the case that we have, quote, biological men in girls' locker rooms. The way it's being phrased.
ESPN analyst Rebecca Lobo called the comments incredibly thoughtful on air. Was Reeve responding to Cunningham directly, or to the broader debate she'd reopened around the league? Her own words suggested the latter. Reeve did not stop at words. On August 2nd, ahead of the Lynx hosting the Fever, she and Cunningham were shown in an animated mid-court conversation before tip-off. Reeve then coached the game in a Trans Kids Belong shirt worn under her blazer, visible throughout the broadcast. Announcer Ryan Ruocco pointed it out on air, noting it as a response to Cunningham's comments. Why choose clothing over a press release? Because a shirt on a sideline, unlike a quote, can't be edited out of the broadcast. The basketball, when it happened, went to Minnesota. The Lynx beat the Fever 108-100, snapping Indiana's 5-game winning streak. Cunningham finished with 3 points, 1 rebound and 2 assists in 23 minutes. A quiet night in a game that had almost nothing to do with basketball by tip-off. She posted afterward the same 2-word dismissal that had become her signature response to this story. ESPN's broadcast didn't stay neutral on how to frame the shirt, and that became its own small story. Lobo told viewers to seek out Reeve's full pre-game comments, calling them thoughtful rather than a soundbite. Not everyone agreed the network should have weighed in at all. Some viewers argued a national broadcast calling one player's position incredibly thoughtful live in a game involving the other player was different from simply reporting the moment happened. Can a broadcast cover a story like this without becoming part of it? That question outlasted the final score. Clothing as protest is not new in this league, and the shirt didn't appear in a vacuum. WNBA locker rooms have used warm-up gear to take positions beyond basketball for years, on both sides of plenty of debates. What made this different was the direct target, a shirt worn specifically in response to a comment from a player on the opposing bench, in a game both were about to play, broadcast to an audience primed to read every gesture as a statement. Reeve never confirmed whether she meant it for Cunningham personally or the wider debate. Would it have drawn the same coverage against a different opponent, without cameras on both benches? Almost certainly not, and that timing is worth being honest about too. What the evidence really shows. Underneath the quotes and the shirts sits a genuine scientific debate, and it is more unsettled than either side's talking points suggest.
Well, we see Cheryl Reed wearing a shirt today in support of trans kids.
The most comprehensive review published so far in this argument, a 2026 systematic review and meta-analysis in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, covering 52 studies and roughly 6,500 participants, found that transgender women who had completed 1 to 3 years of hormone therapy had upper body strength, lower body strength, and aerobic capacity comparable to cisgender women, despite retaining higher lean body mass. The authors concluded the evidence did not support the idea that transgender women retain an inherent competitive advantage after that period of treatment. Does one review, however comprehensive, end an argument this large on its own? No systematic review in a young field ever fully does, and this one is no exception. That finding does not settle the argument, and it has not stopped athletes from weighing in on both sides using science as their footing. Kirsty Miller, a former world champion athlete who transitioned and became a published researcher on hormone therapy's effects on athletic performance, publicly supported part of Cunningham's underlying position while adding nuance the sound bites on both sides had left out. Writing on social media, Miller stated plainly that she believed it was not fair for a male athlete to compete in the WNBA without qualification. But she built that position on a specific, narrower claim than the broadest version of Cunningham's argument. Miller explained that a transgender woman could compete fairly once hormone replacement therapy had run long enough to meaningfully affect strength, speed, and endurance levels, and that skipping past that distinction was where much of the public debate went wrong in both directions. Can someone agree with part of an argument while rejecting the rest of it, without being claimed entirely by either side? Miller's own position is the clearest evidence in this entire story that the answer is yes. Miller went further on a second, separate claim that is often folded into the same argument without being the same argument at all: the question of injury risk. On that point, she broke from the framing Cunningham's strongest supporters have used. Despite frequent public talk, there is no robust empirical evidence that trans women increase injury risk to cisgender women in sport, Miller wrote, adding that safety concerns raised in the debate were mostly hypothetical and unsupported by solid evidence to date.
But the debate in the WNBA is all coming to a head as the country grapples with the rights of transgender and female athletes.
A former athlete with direct expertise in the science agreeing with Cunningham on competitive fairness while explicitly rejecting the safety argument some of Cunningham's own supporters have made is not a detail either side's shorthand version of this story tends to include. Is it possible for both sides to be citing real research and still land in different places? On this topic, apparently, yes. The research constrains the argument without resolving it, and it does not divide as neatly as either set of rally signs suggests. Meta-analyses like that one carry real limitations that both sides tend to skip past when the findings support their position. 52 studies is a substantial body of evidence, but sports science on hormone therapy and elite athletic performance remains a young field, complicated by small sample sizes at the competitive extremes, differing therapy durations across the studies pooled together, and a near-total absence of research specifically involving professional-level athletes rather than recreational ones. None of that invalidates the review's conclusions. It does mean that the science says is doing more work here, for whoever is saying it, than the underlying research can fully support on its own. A caveat that applies equally to anyone citing the review to end the conversation, and to anyone dismissing it to keep the conversation going. Why Caitlin Clark refused to take sides. Caitlin Clark, Cunningham's own teammate, and the player whose name is most closely tied to the Fever's rise, was asked directly where she stood. She declined to take a position, saying that eligibility decisions belong to leagues and governing bodies, rather than individual players. It was a notably different posture than her locker room neighbors, measured where Cunningham was direct, deferential where Cunningham was defiant. Why would the Fever's most visible player choose silence on the exact question her own teammate had built her season's biggest headline around? Because taking a side for the face of the franchise carries a different kind of risk than it does for a reserve guard already known for speaking her mind. The organization around both players reflected some of that same caution. During the height of the story, the Fever did not bring Cunningham or Clark to at least one press gathering, leaving other players to field questions about a controversy neither of the two central figures wanted to address publicly that day. What makes the team's caution notable is what it was surrounding. Indiana entered the stretch as one of the league's more visible rosters by design, built around Clark's national profile and Cunningham's rising one, and a story this large landing on both of the team's most covered players at once left the organization with few clean options. Silence protected nobody from the story continuing to run. Reporters simply redirected their questions to whichever teammate happened to be at the podium that day. But it did keep the two players whose comments would have generated the most coverage out of the news cycle for at least one news cycle. Whether that was strategy or simple scheduling has not been confirmed by anyone inside the organization. There is a basketball season still happening underneath all of this, and none of it paused for the controversy. Indiana kept playing games, kept traveling to road arenas that had by then become predictable sites for both rallies and counter-demonstrations, and kept fielding a roster built around two players who have handled the same story in almost opposite ways. Cunningham has continued speaking whenever asked. Clark has continued declining.
Guys, I'm West Wilson.
And I'm Sophie Cunningham.
And this is the Show Me Something podcast.
The collab you never knew you needed.
Neither approach has ended the questions, and neither was likely to. A story with a Supreme Court ruling, a rival coach's wardrobe choice, a podcast disagreement, and a contested body of medical research, all feeding it was never going to resolve because one team tried to manage its press availability more carefully for a week in August. None of this has resolved anything, and nothing forced it to. Cunningham has not retracted a single word. Reeve has not either. The research keeps accumulating without settling the underlying disagreement, and the WNBA has not issued a policy statement tying any of it together. What remains, for now, is the record. What was said, who said it, what the evidence actually shows, and a locker room that has kept playing basketball through all of it. Where this goes next is not something any single quote in this story has decided. Sophie Cunningham hasn't backed down from a single word she said in July. Cheryl Reeve hasn't either. Somewhere between them sits Caitlin Clark, who has said nothing at all and may never have to. That's not indecision. It's the smartest read on a story with no finish line in sight. The research keeps piling up without settling anything. The rallies keep showing up outside road games. The WNBA hasn't said one official word about it. Whatever happens next, it won't be because either side ran out of things to say. If this breakdown helped, leave a like, drop your take in the comments, and subscribe for the next one.